to kind of work in a normalized schema. With a NoSQL database, you don't have to do stuff like that. On the other hand, for well-known business processes, NoSQL databases can be a little strange. So each model has its use cases. Now, the thing about HBase is that its tables are actually just HDFS files. And because MapReduce takes in takes in HDFS files and outputs HDFS files, that means that MapReduce and Hadoop can read data in from HBase as the input and can produce an HBase table as its output. So Hadoop and HBase can be used together, but that's not required. You can use HBase without Hadoop, or at least without MapReduce, and you can use MapReduce on flat files that have nothing to do with HBase. But you will see them used together in various applications. The interesting thing, by the way, about HDInsight, Microsoft's distribution of Hadoop, is that HBase isn't in it, at least not yet. It is still technically in preview. It was supposed to, I don't know, I think 2 summers ago I was saying I think it'll be in general availability by the end of the year, and it still isn't. But it is at least a public preview now, and so we're getting close. The team is on record as saying that once it's out of preview, HBase will be in there. We'll see. All right, so now let's talk about Microsoft's implementation of Hadoop. It is called HDInsight, and here's an interesting thing about it. It was developed in conjunction with this company called Hortonworks, and Hortonworks is actually one of the most credible leading Hadoop companies in the non-Windows world. Arguably, there are 2 leaders in Hadoop. One is called Cloudera, the other is Hortonworks. Hortonworks is actually a spin-off of the Hadoop team from Yahoo, which you would say gives them ultimate authority, but the fact is that the inventor, the architect of Hadoop himself is the chief architect at Cloudera, and there are other team members that work at Cloudera. So Cloudera and Hortonworks get in lots of bitchy fights with each other about who's more pure, who's more Hadoop, who contributes more code, which one's more open source. It is kind of the silliest sort of infighting. But the point is, those 2 companies I really do have the most credibility, and Microsoft has teams with Hortonworks. Hortonworks provides all the code. Microsoft didn't write the code. They worked with Hortonworks, but what Hortonworks basically did was they took the Apache source code, which is written in Java, so it doesn't need to run on Linux, and they compiled it over on the Windows side, and then they did lots of work and lots of testing to make it work nicely on Windows Server. This gets a little confusing though, because there were supposed to be 2 versions of HDInsight, one running in the cloud and one that you could run on premise. And Microsoft has not yet officially said that that's changing, but it's sort of implying it by omission because they still don't have a server version ready to go. They did in the early previews, and then they took it down. So Microsoft has HDInsight in the cloud, but Hortonworks actually distributes the Windows version of its Hadoop distribution called the Hortonworks Data Platform, or HDP, for Windows for on-premise use. So you can get Hadoop for Windows for on-premise use, but you actually, at least right now, you get it from Hortonworks and not from Microsoft. So right now, if you want to do Hadoop on Windows, the de facto situation is in the cloud you use Microsoft HDInsight, and on premise you use Hortonworks HDP for Windows. It's the same code base for both. That's important to remember. Now, the title of this session is about the fusion of big data and BI. I'm sorry, the biggest flaw of this room is that if you're sitting more than halfway back, you can't see the bottom of the screen. I apologize for that. Good. So, and it's working, right? Sometimes not. But yeah, hopefully when we move, we won't have these low ceilings that cause that problem. And I'm sorry, because really the best thing to do in this room is to design your PowerPoints so that you don't use the lower third of the slides. But there we go. If there's anything you can't read, ask me. If you want to move up to a seat close to the front, you won't disrupt me. So, merging big data and BI, a big part of this is that Hive, which remember is that SQL interface over Hadoop, Hive has an ODBC driver. And that ODBC driver works with the majority of the Microsoft BI stack. So it's kind of Rube Goldberg, to be honest. It's lots of circuitous connections. But you can take a Microsoft BI tool, use the ODBC driver for Hive, then use Hive, and Hive then talks to the MapReduce engine inside of Hadoop. And you can go all the way from end to end with data in Hadoop, all the way up to, for example, Excel. And arguably, the data is a lot more usable with those more evolved BI tools than, say, as plain text on the command line. So that's fair. But Hive has a lot of warts, and we'll talk about those too. How do you provision HDInsight? If you have a Windows Azure account, it's kind of easy. This is still a preview, so what you're going to want to do, what you're going to want to do is sign up for the preview, and then you're going to wait, I think at most a day at this point. And then once you've waited that waiting period, and you come in here, you're going to see in the sidebar here, you're going to see HDInsight show up. So you're going to click on that, and then you're going to click on New down here. Yeah, click on New. And then you can do a quick create where you just fill out some data in this form. I prefer the custom create. It's not very hard. You give the cluster a name. Let's pretend we're going to call it Blue Badge, which I already did, so it's actually telling me that. So I'll call it Blue Badge 2. If you're just experimenting, don't accept the default of 4 nodes, because you're going to get charged for 4 nodes. Just do 1 node. It's totally fine for experimentation. And probably you don't want it in North Europe. I would pick East US. Then you need to provide credentials. You're going to use these credentials to log into your cluster from remote desktop, or to do an ODBC connection, or just to log in the browser to a browser-based console for managing it. So pick your user ID carefully, and your password, and it has to be a pretty strong password. When you get the red exclamation point, you'll learn about all the requirements of that password. And then go here. And it also needs to associate itself with a Windows Azure storage account. By default now, HDInsight maps its HDFS storage onto Azure storage, which seems kind of flaky, but it makes sense if you think about the fact that these Hadoop clusters that you're putting up in the cloud, you're going to provision them and then turn them off. And so by keeping the storage in Azure storage, in effect you're maintaining state, so that when you turn on a new cluster, everything that you had in storage on the old one, if you want to, you can have back, and it'll be exactly where you left it. So you can create a new storage account, or you can pick an existing one. At least a couple of months ago, the requirement was that it had to be in the East US region. And if it wasn't, like, that check mark would be grayed out, but it wouldn't really tell you why. So if you're going to create, I mean, you can create it right here, but if you're going to separately create a storage account in Azure Storage, specifically for use with HDInsight, when you create it, make sure you do it in the East US region, or it won't be compatible, or at least that was the case a little while ago. So you give it the account name, you give it the default container, and at this point you could go ahead and check the checkbox, and it would build your cluster. I've already built our cluster so that I could set up the demo, so we don't need to do that. But those are the steps. And again, if that's sort of a little too much for you, then just do the quick create, give the cluster a name, pick the number of nodes. Notice you can't do 1 node here. So you're going to be setting up with at least 4 nodes. And then it's going to, uses a standard user ID. I actually forget what it is. It's probably administrator or something like that. But you only tell it the password, and you pick the storage account. Yeah, and this is where things were graying out. So, like, I have these other storage accounts, but notice I can't select them. Only the East US one is selectable. And then you would click the check mark. Either way, you're going to see it building up here, and then eventually it'll just say it's ready. And once it's ready, all you have to do is go to, let me put this in Notepad so it's more legible. You're going to go to HTTPS, won't work without the S, the name of your cluster, .Azure HDInsight.net. So remember, it's HTTPS, and remember it's .net and not .com. As long as you remember those two things, you will get it right on the first try. And that will take you to this login page where you will input the same credentials you supplied when you created the cluster. And then you'll click log on. And if the demo gods are willing, we're going to go to the management page for our cluster. And since a washed pot never boils, we're going to go back over to the slides. And then either be pleasantly surprised or not. All right. Right. See how I put in yellow the S and the .net? So that'll help you remember, I hope. And then this just summarizes what we just did. Okay. So you've provisioned your cluster, and now you actually want to process some data with it. There are some sample data sets up there, and even some sample code that you can use. Honestly, the samples aren't all that interesting, but if you're anything like me, getting hands-on and sort of doing it all by yourself and clicking it and seeing the result is a very empowering thing. So it's great that you can do that without having a lot of setup beforehand. Again, the way MapReduce code works natively is that you write it in Java. And you build a jar file, and you upload the jar file. You can think of a jar file a little bit like a .NET assembly. And then you will go to a form where you specify the jar file that has both your map code and your reduce code, and where it's getting its input, and where it should put its output, and you'll click a submit button and it'll run. As I said, though, you don't actually have to write this stuff in Java. And that's because there's this thing that comes with Hadoop, which is itself a Java-based MapReduce set of code called streaming. And what streaming does is it will kind of shell out and run any executable that you give it as the mapper, and any other executable that you give it as the reducer. So as long as you have a language that can compile down to an executable, you're good to go. You have to specify the names of the exes when you submit your job, but it'll work. And then in your code inside whatever language you're using, you can expect to get the input data on standard in and to put the output data on standard out. So you can write MapReduce code in C# by, in effect, creating two different C# console applications. One that will have your mapper code and one that will have your reducer code. And that's what we're going to look at in a second. You can do this all at the command line. In the Windows world, that means actually opening, effectively what I still call a DOS command window, right? So at the C prompt, you can run this. What I would suggest is at the very least you use their form. As you fill it out, it outputs, it builds the command line string that you would use. And if you feel empowered by running it at the command line, then you can copy and paste that text into the clipboard, do a remote desktop connection into the head node in the cluster, open up a command window, paste in the command, as long as you're doing it from the right folder, hit enter, and you will run your job that way. Question?
So how was the debugging experience?
There's a perfect straight line into this slide. The way I'm going to show you, the debugging experience kind of doesn't exist. Other than the old-fashioned way of debugging, which is putting in code that will spit stuff out in a log file or something like that. But in fact, there are ways to debug. So I'm showing you the really simple way to do it with streaming. There is actually an SDK available. It's an open source piece of code that you can download, and actually it's a NuGet package, and it's called mrlib, as in MapReduce. And if you download that, and you download a special version of HDInsight that runs as a single node cluster on your local dev machine, they also give you this kind of developer fabric, if you will, that runs everything in memory and does actually allow you to set breakpoints and so forth. You're not really running against Hadoop when you do that. You're running sort of against a Hadoop simulator, but it is possible to do. What's also neat about the SDK is that there's a link provider. So instead of having to write SQL, if that's too hard for you, you can write link code, but it's still going to the ODBC driver, it's still going to Hive. The Rube Goldberg contraption is still there. In fact, you've now added one extra little doodad to the Rube Goldberg contraption. So there ends up being a couple different ways to do C# against Hadoop. One is the raw streaming way that I'm going to show you. Another is to use the SDK and link to Hive. And the third way is, if you don't want to mess around with link, because there's an ODBC driver, you can just use ADO.NET and the ODBC client to talk to Hive that way. And that's actually kind of nice, because then you can do data binding. And I've done that. Like if you're still doing web forms, and I think a lot of people still are, you can actually bind a data grid to your results that come back from Hadoop. So it does kind of connect the worlds. Josiah's sitting right here, and I didn't notice until just now. Nice to see you. Oh boy. So you also get these base classes, mapper base and reducer base, and they give you the same kind of environment you would have if you were writing the MapReduce code in Java. So instead of having to look on standard in and standard out for every single key value pair, you'll get all the values in the reducer. You'll get all the values as a single list or array. I forget which, to be honest. But yeah, and it will even automate the deployment for you. So you can use the SDK, or you can just do it the raw way. I like showing the raw way actually because it's much simpler to understand because there's no abstractions. I think, like with a lot of things, it's better to understand the simple way first and then use a tool that will remove the tedium. All right, we've given that browser a lot of time, so oh good. Now, if only I knew where I put my glasses. I'm like the absent professor today. Here they are. Got them. Thank you. All right. So as you can see, there is a pseudo tiled interface here, and different tiles do different things. Of course, if you wanted to open up a remote desktop session, you can do that right from here. And I'll just show you so that Hadoop doesn't scare you. It's just going to be a Windows Server desktop. And you're going to use those same credentials, right? The same credentials you used when you created the cluster. So I'm going to put in the password that I specified. And I think it's actually Windows Server 2008 or 2 still. I don't think it's 2012. And there's even a nice little shortcut that you get for free that takes you to the right folder so that you can do command line stuff. I can't do the zoom in here because we're inside of an RDP session, but this is the C prompt that you need to do command line stuff against Hadoop. Okay, we're not going to work in this environment. I just wanted to show you that it's there as an option. And let's keep going. Kevin's here? You're on it 3, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just wanted to keep my time straight. All right. What we're going to do is go to create job. Actually, I lied. There's one already filled out, so we're going to go to that. And I'm also going to take you to some source code if I can. So this is Visual Studio 2012, and this is a solution that has 2 C# console applications. And each one just has code in the void main function. That's kind of how you do it. So the void main of the exe that you will use as your mapper is your map function, and the void main in the exe that you're going to use as your reducer, I went backwards there, didn't I, is your reducer. So this is the mapper, actually. This guy is the reducer. This is the sort of hello world of Hadoop. It's called word count. And what word count does is it takes like an ebook that's a text file, and it counts up all of the distinct words that it finds and the number of occurrences of each, and it outputs an alphabetical list of all of them. So again, remember, it's a little bit like the Wizard of Oz, who's like is almighty and powerful, and then it turns out it's just this short little man, and he says, "Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain." This code is sort of the equivalent of that. So all it's doing is it's calling readline to get a line of text in from that ebook, and then it's using split to split all the words into an array. And then it's just looping through the length of that array, and it's outputting a key and value pair. And in fact, it's not even outputting a value. It's just outputting the word as the key. The value is an implied 1, the number of occurrences being 1. So remember, this is going to get shuffled around so that all the occurrences of a given word get put consecutively as the input to the reducer, and the reducer is going to do a read line, and it's going to loop through, and it's going to loop through line by line until the word that it read before is not equal to the word that it read now. By the way, I didn't write this code. This is actually from Microsoft, and it's just incrementing a counter. And when it's done, see, there's the increment. And when it's done, it's going to output the word and the number of occurrences. Okay? This is crazy simple, silly computer science 101 code. But again, it's being run by an engine that can run the silly code in a massively parallel way. And so we will be able to give it an entire text, and before too long, see the count of all the words. Now, I've already compiled these to my mapper.exe and my reducer.exe. I've already uploaded them to HDFS. And so my mapper.exe and my reducer.exe are already there. Notice the name of the the jar file is grayed out, because when you do a streaming job, you're using the one called Hadoop-streaming.jar. That's how streaming jobs run. There really is Java code here. It's just shelling out every time its mapper is called, and shelling out every time its reducer is called. And then I'm just giving it a bunch of strings, and ultimately I'm just generating this command line on the teal background here. And it's Hadoop space jar, and then the name of the jar, and then I tell it a bunch of files. ASV means Azure Storage Vault, as in Azure Storage. So I'm giving it a path in Azure Storage to my mapper.exe and my reducer.exe. I'm also giving it the path to the text file, the ebook, in effect, that we're going to parse through. And I'm telling it to put the output into actually a folder. Although that looks like a file, it's going to put it in a folder called wc.txt. Where am I? wc.txt. That's actually a folder name, and it will output a file in that folder, or a bunch of files, one for each reducer, and that will just be a flat file that has our results. So if I zoom out of here and then click on execute job, this will actually run our MapReduce job. Now somewhere when they went from like preview whatever to preview whatever +1, this screen kind of broke. We're supposed to see progress under output and under debug output so that we know what percentage of the way through the job we are. For some reason, at some point, this broke and you don't see that. So actually the only way we can tell if we're done is to look at that output folder and see if we have the result file yet. So to do that, I'm going to take you to a command line. I'm going to open up another browser tab, and I'm going to take you to this interactive console here. And I've got in Notepad a nice little cheat sheet opened up. And this is a really neat command prompt because it lets you actually use JavaScript as a command line command language, and it also lets you execute HDFS commands. So if you want to execute an HDFS command, you precede it with a hash mark. And then ls, that if you've worked with any Unix-based file system, you know what ls is. If you haven't, it's the Unix Linux equivalent of dir. So we're saying, give me a directory of example, data, streaming output, and remember, wc.txt is actually a folder name, not a file name. So what's probably going to happen, oh, I did the non-live zoom in. So if I hit enter, oh wow, I talked so long it's actually done. So there we have and this is typical of what you see. You'll always want to look for the word success, which, I mean, that seems mean that I would say that, but you'll see it again and again. Like, that's how you know something worked, is if the word success is involved somewhere. And then, depending on how many reducers you have, you're going to have a number of output files. This job was able to be done with a single reducer, so we have a single output file. So that thing, that part-00000, that is our output file. And I'll prove that to you by dumping out the contents of that output file, which is here. And I'm doing the cat command, which is basically typing out the contents. And here is, sorry about that, I'll zoom in. I'll do a live zoom so we can scroll through it. This is a list of all of the words. Now you will see some duplicates here because the silly sample code for Microsoft uses a single space as its delimiter. So if there's punctuation or double spaces between words, it will actually see the same word as two different words in certain cases. But the point is, we have what we wanted, and I could scroll all the way down with the thumb here. At least I hope I can. And we will get to the end of our list, and we will get to an imprompt. So that's our word list. Now, here's what I can do for those of you who can't see the bottom of the screen. There is actually a Cls command. Here's the screen. It takes us back up to the top. And I'll execute my next cheat sheet. And now what I'm actually going to do is use pig. Remember pig? I said it's sort of its own data transformation language. And what I'm doing with pig here, actually let's look at it in Notepad, it's a little easier to read, is I'm saying take that output file, right? That's the same path that we just looked at. Take that output file, and I want you to interpret a database schema from that file by looking at the first thing you see before a tab and giving that a column name of word, and looking at the thing after the tab and calling it count. And by the way, type that as an integer, because everything is a string by default. So if I want you to type something not as a string, I need to tell you what data type it is. So this is going to make a table out of that file, and the table has two columns. One's called word and one's called count. And then I'm going to say order by count, descending. And then what I want you to do is take the first 10 rows. And I want you to output that to a new folder called top 10 words. So that's going to create a new result file, and that's going to have the top 10 words from the text. So if we, did I already paste that? Yeah, I did. So what I'm going to do now is hit enter. Now this is running a pig job, but remember, just like Hive, just like MapHop, just like Scoop, all these things are actually layered on top of the MapReduce engine. So a pig job actually is a MapReduce job. Sometimes, in fact, it's more than one. And if I scroll all the way to the right, I can actually click this link over here, which will show me a progress page. And this one is not broken. So it's telling us where we are. Right now, we're 0% complete. This will get to 100, but rather, let's see, now we're at 16. Rather than watch it, let's just go back to the deck for a minute. All right. So I want to talk to you about this idea, because we're talking about the merging of big data and BI. There is this idea out there that kind of compares data to petroleum. So this is another cliche, you know, and you have crude oil and you have refined oil. So the idea is that Hadoop is used with crude oil, and you'll handle that that data from the great unwashed, that messy unstructured data, and you will shape it and you will do things to it. And then the output from Hadoop, you'll pass that to a BI tool. And the BI tool will work with the refined oil, the gasoline. Now, I actually think this is what a lot of BI companies are saying to kind of make themselves feel better. Like, Hadoop's not really a threat if I just pretend it's for dealing with big, ugly, unstructured data, and then it's my slave, right? It's my bitch. It takes the raw data, it does what it has to do, and then it gives it to me so I can do what I've always done. That's probably going to change. I think you're going to see most BI tools able to talk to Hadoop directly and bypass MapReduce. In fact, we're already seeing a lot of that. But for right now, the bulk of the bulk of Hadoop deployments that are out there now are still using MapReduce and still working this way. So this data refinery model is there. And Hive is a big part of it. Hive, again, gives you a SQL abstraction layer over MapReduce. Now, here's the thing about MapReduce. Whether that progress screen works or not, what you should have noticed, I didn't point it out, but what you should have noticed is when we run MapReduce, we're submitting a job. And we're it's like mainframe stuff. We're there's a lot of overhead there, that there's a job manager that runs it. It sort of deals with sending different pieces of work out to different nodes in the cluster, and you gotta wait a while. Ours didn't take that long because it actually wasn't a big amount of data. Remember, Hadoop can be used on small data too, and in fact, that's what we did. So these things can take a while. Even for simple queries, things can take a while. Now, so you might do a select star from table name where something greater than 5 and think that's a simple SQL query, but because Hive is actually generating MapReduce code from your SQL, you still have all of the overhead of MapReduce and the fact that it's batch and not interactive. Actually, that very problem is the crux of what's going on in the Hadoop world now, where a number of vendors are trying to come up with SQL interfaces that bypass MapReduce entirely. We'll talk about a few of them. But right now, the standard is still, okay, you're going to use Hive. Hive's going to run your query. It's going to take a while. It's going to give you back the data. And then you'll probably be able to do some interactive stuff with the results. But probably you can't work too interactively, too iteratively with the data in Hadoop itself, because every time you want to do the simplest query, you may have to wait a minute or 20. How many of you live in Manhattan? Anybody? All right, 1, 2. This has started changing, but I grew up here, and the way we shop for groceries is we go to a supermarket that's, well, historically they've been really lousy with rotten fruit. We picked up a few items, what we could carry, we took them home, and then the next day we went out and sort of did the same thing. Those of you who live outside the city are probably doing a bulk amount of shopping for the week or maybe even the month. Meanwhile, we're jealous because, well, unless we go up to East Harlem, we don't have BJ's and we don't have Costco. But obviously the unit cost, if we go out of our way, if we rent a zip car and go to Jersey City and go to BJ's, we can get lots of groceries, and if we have an empty closet, we can put them somewhere, and then our unit costs go way down. But there's a lot of overhead involved. So this is, wow, that was Shaggy Dog, but this is sort of that's my folksy little metaphor for Hive and MapReduce, right? It's kind of like a Manhattanite going to BJ's in Jersey City to get a box of Lipton chicken noodle soup, right? It isn't good. BJ's isn't good for that. It is really good if we're getting a whole bunch of groceries. If we have a rental in the Hamptons or on Fire Island and we need like tons of stuff and paper towels and all kinds of cereal for the whole summer, then it makes sense. And that's sort of the case with MapReduce. MapReduce is great if you have a specific task, you need to run it repeatedly on huge volumes of data, it works great. If what you want to do are little experimental iterative queries, which is typically what you do with BI tools, especially when you're doing data discovery and visualization, then MapReduce doesn't work so well. So Hive is a good kind of temporary thing for now. But what the whole industry is doing is trying to enable this scenario where I can just go to the Gristides on the corner, hold my nose, go in, buy what I need, and run out again. So I'm going to show you Hive, and then eventually I'm going to show you using Hive from Excel in Power View, which will be the kind of dramatic conclusion. Let's go here at 100. Wow, I hate when that happens. It said 100% complete. You'll have to.
the time of that?
I'm sorry.
In your log, does it show you get an end time of that?
Oh, do I get a time elapsed? That's a great question. I don't know the answer.
On the left, you might have to start and then.
Yeah, I might have to scroll. I think you've got time stamps. There's a time stamp on the bottom,
You think there's a couple of minutes?
and there was a time stamp on the top. So yeah, that's Hadoop for you. You can get it, but you're going to have to do some work. Can't you just tell me the elapsed time? No.
2 minutes.
You wouldn't be able to prove your command line metal. Yeah, this is just a log. Yes, absolutely. So, and it's even telling us where the output is. And somewhere there is the word success with it. There it is, with an exclamation point. Like I said, you're always looking for that word success. Okay, good. So we have our output. So now what I'm going to do is close this tab. We're back at the man prompt, and I'm going to come in and do a few things here. The first thing I'm going to do is take that output file, top 10 words, and I'm going to read it into a buffer called file. The second thing I'm going to do is take that buffer and parse it into a JavaScript array called data. And once again, I will sort of provide schema at a just-in-time moment. So I'm going to say, assume it's tab delimited, look for the first thing, put that in an array element called word, and put the other one after the tab into an array element called count, and type that as an integer. And then you'll notice I'll actually have the ability right here in this silly little command line console to do a bar chart and a pie chart. So let's see this in action. I guess I didn't hit Control C. It's right there. Okay. So now it's read things into the file and into the buffer, and it even shows us what it put in the buffer. So there's our top 10 list. You'll notice the second most popular word in this text is space. Again, not the brightest code, but there it is. And then we'll do some Alt-Tab Olympics here. I'm going to create the array. And you can even see the JSON notation of the array. And then I'll do the bar chart. Let me clear the screen though, so we're back up at the top. There's the bar chart. Those are the same 10 words we had before, each one with a bar. I wouldn't take this bar chart to a board meeting. I would consider this a little bit of a diagnostic workbench, but like I said, if you can do it here, you'll be able to do it through Hive in Excel and in Power View, and that's where things get a little more exciting, but at least you can do a reality test over here. All right, so now what have I shown you? We're actually up to the next demo where I'm going to show you Hive. So we've done the MapReduce job, we've done the pig processing of the data. By the way, this is just an SVG file. So you can actually click on it, it comes up in its own silly web page, and I suppose you could copy and paste that into a PowerPoint if you wanted to take it to the board meeting, but again, not especially recommended. This thing thinks our original MapReduce job is still running, so that's silly. And what I'm going to do now is, you see this button that says Hive? I'm going to click that, and this gives us a little kind of SQL window here. So eventually this will populate with the name of all the tables that we have, and we only have one. The way it's set up, you get one sample data table with Hive, and you're going to love the file name. Once this drop-down list of one item populates, there it is. And can you read the name of the Hive sample table? It's Hive sample table. So we're going to pick that, and then we get a list of columns over here. And if you don't know how to write SQL, you can actually kind of cut and paste column names and that sort of silly. We can just do this. I can do select star from Hive sample table, and I'll limit it to the first 200 rows. There's about 60,000 rows in this table. I'll click evaluate, and you will see that even for something simple like this, there's some overhead. And by the way, if you're doing a SQL, a select star without a where clause on it, it doesn't have to do anything. It's just dumping the file. So usually that's relatively quick, but even that took a while. Now, it's almost impossible to do anything with the data in this environment, and that's why we're going to move to Excel in a second. But what I can show you right away is that this sample data table has data from cell towers that identify the handset. It gives you some data about the tower itself and its location, and it tells you about interactions with different handsets and how long those interactions were, and what platform they're on, and what brand they are, and what model they are. And we can do a little bit of analytics with that, so we will. Let's go back to the slides, though, and we've got about 10 minutes to go here. HDInsight can get its data from HDFS, straight from blob storage, from Hive tables, and as I said, hopefully when this thing is GA, you'll be able to get data from HBase as well. But right now, HBase is not in the distribution. The other thing that, has been implicit in what I've been showing you is this whole idea of unstructured data and schema. How can data be unstructured if we're going to do analytics on it? It can't, actually. It has to be structured. The difference is with Hadoop, you specify the structure at query time. So the data is stored in an unstructured format. It is then interpreted in a structured format. So when we specified word, space, count, int, we were imposing the schema at query time, just-in-time schema. Why would you want to do that? Well, because the data that you're working with, you may want to structure differently depending on the analysis. And I have some examples up here. I'm not going to read them all, but if you're doing stuff on addresses, do you want to parse out street, city, state, and zip as separate values, or just kind of treat the whole thing as one big string? And are date and time two fields or one? And it can go on, especially because when you put things in a key and value format, the value can be almost anything, right? You could have a blob be the value. You could have a Word document be the value, and the key could just be the name of the file. So when you're looking at that value, there's all kinds of ways to parse that value and deal with it at the time of analysis. And that's different from putting stuff in a relational database where obviously you have to determine the schema in advance. Now, how does Microsoft BI fit in? As I said, it's all about this ODBC driver right now and all the different components of the BI stack that can use it. Let me be real clear about what can and what cannot. So Excel can use it directly. I know. We've got 10 minutes, right? What do you mean, no? He starts at 3, and isn't it 10 of 3?
Yeah.
Right.
So, 10 minutes.
I just need 2 minutes to set up.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. No, I won't need all 10. And we'll do the drawing when Kevin's setting up. Analysis services tabular mode, which if you don't know is sort of the analysis services version of Power Pivot. That can use it. Power View can use it. A relational database can use it if you involve Scoop. And actually, this slide's I'm mushing 2 things in one slide here. I'm telling you what can use the ODBC driver, and then I'm telling you about other parts of the BI stack that can work with Hadoop. So Parallel Data Warehouse has this new component called Polybase that can talk to HDFS directly. And meanwhile, the tabular mode of Hadoop and Excel and Power View and even reporting services can use the ODBC driver. But it's important to realize that the MOLAP mode of analysis services cannot use ODBC drivers, therefore it cannot talk to Hive. Only the tabular mode can. And what I'm going to do is kind of skip through things here just to tell you that Power Pivot is a sort of good destination for the data that might come out of Hadoop using Hive. And then Power Pivot models can be upsized to SQL Server Analysis Services tabular models. You do that by creating a new tabular project from an existing Excel workbook. So now what I want to do is run a similar query, but let's do it from Excel. We'll pretend you didn't see that. It's done. We'll start from scratch. And I'm going to go to data. I've already set up an ODBC data source that's pointing to my cluster. So I'm leaving out a couple of steps, but in the interest of time, that's probably okay. I'm going to click existing connections. That's my Excel connection file that points to the same Hive sample table that you just saw. I'm going to click on OK. Once again, those same credentials that I needed to log into the browser and to log into RDP, it needs it here too. And it doesn't store the password, which is why I'm specifying it. And now it's going to run a select star against Hive sample table and bring in all that data and put it in the workbook. And what's nice about Excel 2013 is we can get the workbook data into a Power Pivot model and do it all implicitly. I'll show you what I mean. So there's the data. It's already a nicer place to look at the data than that silly console was. And what I can now do is click on Insert. Sorry, I don't want Pivot Chart. I want Power View. We'll wait for Power View to open. Now that data is not in the Power Pivot model yet. But what's cool about Excel 2013 and Power View is it's going to show us the table and its columns. Oh, it's already there. That's bizarre. Oh, it's there because my cursor was on the table, so it selected it and certain columns by default. And as a byproduct of doing that, it actually added it to the model. If my cursor were somewhere else, that wouldn't have happened. I would have seen this table here, but it would have been grayed out. And you see that this little liffy thing here, that wouldn't have been there. But as soon as I checked a particular column, it would have added it to the model dynamically. The grayed out stuff would no longer be grayed out, and I'd have what I need. I'm going to build a really quick Power View report, and we're going to be done. I'm actually going to delete the thing that's here. Let's start from scratch. Let's get rid of the filter. Let's pick device make and query dwell time. Let's resize this a little bit. Let's change this to a column chart, and then I'll update in a second. Good. Oh, I didn't want make. I'm sorry. I wanted platform and query dwell time, and I want to change that to a column chart. We'll resize that. Good. Then down here, I'm going to do another visualization, and we're going to pick model and query dwell time. And we're going to move this, resize it, and change it, add query dwell time, and change it to a line chart. Then I'm going to add country as a slicer. Click slicer, select United States, and I'm going to pick one more. I'm going to pick state. If I can find state, there it is. And I'm going to make that a slicer as well. And now we can see the breakdown of different cell phone platforms or smartphone platforms in different states. So if I pick Colorado, we have a lot of Android and less iPhone. If I pick California, it will be the reverse. And if I click on any one of these platforms, we're going to see all the models that belong to it down there. The joke for Windows Phone is you have to have really aim with your mouse. But if you, see, I missed it the first time, but if you click it, then you'll see the Windows Phone stuff as well. So this is a demonstration of going end to end. We went to Hadoop, we used Hive, the ODBC driver, we brought it into Excel, and then finally into Power View. So even though Hadoop is this kind of messy thing with a command line, the end result is you can get some pretty sophisticated ways to work with it. Scoop is an import-output thing that also generates MapReduce code for moving data in and out of HDFS to various data warehouse platforms. Polybase, I mentioned before, It takes the parallel data warehouse engine and has it talk directly to the data nodes in the Hadoop cluster. And here are some of those competitors I mentioned. These all go around MapReduce, just like Polybase does. Cloudera's is called Impala. Teradata Astra's is called SQL H. Pivotal's is called Hawk. And there's a company called Hadapt that actually overlays an MPP data warehouse and Hadoop on a single cluster. And the moral of the story is, if you can merge this with BI tools, then you get the power of Hadoop, and you get the slightly more user-friendly experience of working with BI tools. I'll upload this deck, and you'll be able to click on all these links, the various home pages, including my blog, but also the Apache home pages for Hadoop and Hive and Pig, and the home pages for HDInsight and SQL Server Big Data. You'll have my contact info, and we are done.